Okay, now you can count.
All right, now we'll go in three, two, one. And hello to all of you out there in podcast world. This is the Front Row Movie Reviews, the podcast for people who actually like movies. I'm your host, Brandon Davis, and this is our November edition of Front Row Classics. And I still can't number the episodes because we still have not released Young Frankenstein.
Maybe it could be a Christmas episode.
That'd be funny. That'd be funny. We can release it on Christmas Day. But
It's a gift from us to you. It may be a coal in your stocking, but it's still a gift. I wasn't on that one,
but
so I can make fun of it.
but yeah, anyway, we are back here on Front Row Classics, and I have somebody who actually has not been on a Classics episode since February. And even though we recorded in February, it just got released a couple months ago.
So really, you've just heard me, and I'm
Yeah.
back. The joys of time travel.
Yeah. Although Kevin's not with us, but you forgot Kevin was even on that episode.
Because we recorded it 6 months before it aired, so I forgot.
Yeah, so but this one I have been told will actually get recorded just a couple days after, will get released just a couple days after we record this. So
Supposedly, this
fingers
is dropping
crossed.
on the 24th.
Yeah,
This
this
is
is
this is
our
Black.
Thanksgiving.
This is our Black Friday podcast. So when you're for those
So
of you who are sitting in the parking lot of your big box of choice, wishing you had made better life choices, you can listen to this.
yes, and hear all about the ways that our justice system should work.
Oh, I have so much to say. My soapbox is ready.
Alrighty. Well, this is a movie where you can get on it as much as you want to. So we are talking about 12 Angry Men from 1957, and this is a movie that I have loved for a long time, and I'm excited to get to talk about it. I was trying to figure when we could squeeze it in, and I just couldn't figure out what to do for this month, and I said, well, it's time to do it. We haven't even talked about Henry Fonda yet on classics, so it's time. And this is to me um, just kind of a miracle movie because it's not very long. It's all shot in one room. You have 12 mostly older white guys sitting and talking the whole time, and and you would think that it wouldn't be as riveting as it is, and it's one of the most riveting movies ever made, in my opinion. Scott, what are your first impressions of 12 Angry Men?
I don't know where I first saw this. I think it was a very good school teacher who wanted
Mm-hmm.
us to learn about leadership.
Yeah,
And he or she, I can't remember who, unfortunately, showed this to us. So I think that's probably the first experience I had with this. And I was, as you were, I was enthralled with it. This is my kind of movie. I really love character pieces where the plot doesn't get in the way of the characters trying to figure out what's going to happen throughout the story. And I also
yeah,
like movies that are, for lack of a better term, claustrophobic because it
hmm,
forces the actors to do more. It forces the director to do more. And when we talk about things we love about this movie, I'm going to talk about staging a lot because there's so much
oh
going
yeah,
on in this one room. It's just amazing. But in general, this is probably in my top 10 of favorite films of all time, and it's probably the only film from this era. I can say that because I'm usually the guy who likes the newer stuff, but this film, it just it's a time capsule in itself, but really, aside from a few things, it could be, and it is a stage play, so it's still done today. It could be done without changing anything and still be relevant today.
yeah. The interesting thing about this, and I'll just do some introductory stuff here. We're going to be formatting this episode a little differently than we do classics, but this movie, I think it's kind of fitting since Scott and I, if you're listening to this, you know that we host Zonasodes by now, I'm sure. But this started out as a television play, so it started out on TV first, and it was a live television play written by Reginald Rose, who wrote the screenplay for this movie and also produced it along with Henry Fonda. And he thought that it deserved to be done on the big screen, and no studio would buy it because television was new, And so the thought was, well, if people could sit at home and watch it for free, why are they going to pay money to see it? So no studio would buy it. So they finally were able to get United Artists, which was a small independent studio, to do it. And Henry Fonda put in a lot of his own money because he believed in the project so much. And they Fonda really, Lee J. Cobb was kind of well known at this time because he'd been in On the Waterfront, but Fonda's really the only major star. The rest of these actors are pulled from either TV or theater, and they would, of course, a lot of them would go on to become major stars in movies and later TV. But this was sort of the little movie that could.
And most of them will show up on the Twilight Zone sooner or later.
Yeah. We've already, when we go through the jurors here, I want to figure out who we've seen so far. But a little cross promotion. but yeah, this movie, it's just, and just to give you a little bit of plot, there's actually not a whole lot of plot. Like we said, it's a character driven piece, it's not a plot driven piece. And it's basically what you would think. It's 12 men who are sitting on a jury about this young teenager who has supposedly murdered his father. And they go in with the overwhelming opinion that he's guilty, but one juror stands alone and really hangs on to the idea that you have to have some sort of reasonable doubt, um, in your mind to declare him not guilty. And slowly, the votes turn one by one and start siding with juror number 8. And that's another interesting thing about this movie is you never learn their names. You hear Fonda's name and the older man's name at last names at the very end, but you just know them by their juror numbers. And that's an interesting sort of conceit of this movie too, which is really really interesting. But let's get into how we're going to do this. We're actually going to go juror by juror with this movie, which I think is an interesting way to do it. And that way we can actually talk about moments involving each one. And I think that's the best way to handle it, because I mentioned to Scott before the podcast, you really can't talk about favorite scenes in this movie because it's all done in real time, and it's one long scene. It all takes place in the same room, and it's all done very, very seamlessly. And it gets to be a little claustrophobic, and I'll talk a little bit later about how, some of the great camera work. But before we get into the jurors, I also want to get into Fonda also took a risk by hiring a first-time director for this movie, Sidney Lumet, who would later become one of the major directors of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He directed stuff like Serpico and The Verdict and Network and Dog Day Afternoon and The Original Murder on the Orient Express, and a lot of great movies. And I saw an interview on the DVD with Lumet, and he said, nowadays he looks back and he didn't realize how much guts he had, because most big studios, would really try and talk him out of a lot of the things he was doing by giving it the claustrophobic look and hiring the actors he did. But he said, I didn't know that's not what you were supposed to do, so I just went with my gut. And he and he made a classic. So let's get started here with the jurors here. How do you want to do this, Scott? Do you just want to name them one by one and then we'll just talk about them?
Much like the foreman, let's have them sit in order. I think we should probably skip over. We should probably skip over juror number 8 until the end. That's my guess.
Sure. Well, let's talk about juror number 1, played by Martin Balsam, who we've seen on The Twilight Zone.
Yes, we have.
60mm Shrine. And a really good actor, was in a lot of movies, Psycho and Breakfast at Tiffany's, and really really solid actor. But I have Wikipedia pulled up here, and I double checked my facts to make sure they weren't lying to me. But he's an assistant high school football coach, which of course we see him mention to Fonda. He's the jury foreman. He's somewhat preoccupied with his duties, although helpful to accommodate others. And he actually is the 9th to ultimately vote not guilty, and he never really gives the reason for his change. We'll start with you, though. What role do you think juror number 1 plays in this movie?
Juror number 1, for me, is a prop for other jurors, and there's a couple of these because at the end of the day, you have you have our protagonist, juror number 8, Henry Fonda, and you have juror number 3 and 4, who are not so much the antagonist, but the foil for juror number 8 through most of it. And
Yeah.
juror number 1 is trying to be the foreman. You can tell that he was elected because he probably was the only guy who wanted or even stepped up for the job when the jurors first met. And so he's trying to do this in a democratic way, trying to keep everything in order. But we learn a lot about juror number 3 through juror number 1, because juror number 3 is a bully, and I will get into more of him in a few minutes. But you see how 3 and 8 deal with the foreman differently. Henry Fonda's character gives him the support he needs to lead the group and saying, "You're fine, you're doing okay." But 3 does everything he can right away to shut down 1, because 3 knows the only people in the room who could be a problem to him are anyone else who could be a natural leader. So he immediately shuts down 1 by basically just telling him to shut down. And you see that in Balsam's face when he gets ridiculed the first time and he gets dejected and sits down in the chair and turns away from the group towards the camera and just puts his hand on his cheek, and he's just gone at that point. And through the rest of the movie, he no longer has that presence as the de facto leader. And I think that's one of the main things that we see. And you mentioned already that he never actually gives us this reason why he decides to vote not guilty. But I think his reasoning is, again, he is just being a prop by both the protagonist and the antagonist, and the protagonist has made a better argument finally. So he's just going to go with it.
Yeah, he's a fair guy. I do love the moment with him and Fonda when they've all taken this little break and there's that storm out and he's telling him the story about coaching the ball game and it's starting to rain and everything, and you can tell that he's this very passive family guy who just likes coaching little league and doing all this stuff and is trying to and unfortunately, juror number 3 is just too much for him. And there's always, and you mentioned it, great character moments that the camera does, and that little zoom into him after he's really been overtaken by number 3. And I think his line is like, "Boy, I don't care what you do." And then we never hear from him really for the rest of the movie, except when it's time to vote or whatever. So he's an interesting, he's kind of the interesting character because the kind of the anchor of the whole thing, but that really gets sort of deferred to number 8. It's sort of an interesting. He's a really really interesting character.
And to go back to the thunderstorm scene, that's another way that juror number 8 and juror number baseball dude, juror number 7, Jack Warden, he points out in the bathroom, do you know what the soft sell is? Because you're good at it. And you see that when 1 is talking about coaching and Fonda just sits there and smiles and listens to him. You don't really know if Fonda gives a crap at all. But Fonda is endearing himself to this guy. And that's one of the things I want to talk about when we get to juror number 8 is he has learned what everyone else's need is. And he is going to press on that need ever so gently in order to get the verdict that he needs. He decides, probably not right at the beginning, but soon after that, he's going to have to push on every one of these people in a different way to get to the solution he needs. And sometimes he gets lucky, and we'll talk about that too. But the one scene with them at the window is when I think Fonda is really endearing himself to 1, and 1 finally says, if it's between the loudmouth and the guy who listened to me for a few minutes, I'm going to go with the guy who listened to me.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And, I think that, Balsam doesn't have a whole lot to do, but the little bit that he gets to do in this movie, he makes really memorable. And I think that that's what sort of called for. But let's move on now to juror number 2, played by John Fiedler, Piglet.
And he's in Twilight Zone too. We're going to see him in a few weeks,
Younger,
Brandon. Night of the Meek.
Yeah, and here on the juror descriptions I found here, it describes juror number 2 as a meek and unpretentious bank worker, hated by others, but as the climax builds, so does his courage. He's the 5th to ultimately vote not guilty.
Yeah.
This is a character I really like because he's someone who in the beginning really gets stomped on. As you go on and on and on, he really starts calling out people. Like when he gets on juror number 3, who's talking about the evidence, and goes, "I thought you said we could throw out the evidence," and things like that. He's really someone who really sort of finds his footing as time goes on, and he's one of those characters that juror number 8, Fonda, really helps find their voice through the whole thing.
And I love it when he just shuts down 3. And just basically points out what everyone else is thinking, and that is that you're really not a good person in general. And his kind of piglet-like voice is a perfect way of doing that, because he is the smallest guy in the room. Maybe juror number 11, maybe the smallest guy in the room, but really. It's between him and 2, and 2 has that wonderful moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just so funny to see 2 and 3 sitting next to each other, because if there were any 2 jurors that are the polar opposites of each other, it's those 2. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting juxtaposition, and I love as his courage really starts to mount. But and he's another one of those jurors that doesn't get really any of the big dramatic moments like some of these that we'll be talking about down the road. But I think he is an essential part, because him finding his voice allows some of the quieter, meeker ones to begin to find their voice as the votes start to turn toward juror number 8. So I think that he is an absolutely essential juror when you look at the big picture.
Agreed.
Well, now we got a lot to talk about now here on this one. Juror number 3, played by Lee J. Cobb, who
not in the Twilight Zone.
An amazing actor.
Oh, I'm sorry, I am wrong. He was in the Twilight Zone.
Oh, he was?
Yes, he was in Cavender is Coming, along with juror number 4, E.G. Marshall.
Oh, wow.
And John Felder. They were all in Cavender is Coming, it looks like, based on this.
Oh, fun. So
it's a season 5. You got some time.
Okay. So, but yeah, Lee J.
Season
Cobb.
3, actually, I'm sorry.
And as you mentioned before, no, that's okay. And as you mentioned before, he is he's the bully of the group, and he's really he's the antagonist of the piece. Yet, in my opinion, not the most despicable of the group. And we'll get to him later.
Yeah. Agreed. I think everyone agrees. Unless you're a Trump voter, you agree. No, sorry. Sorry.
Oh, this is but
I'll be good.
This guy really has it's not so much any kind of political beliefs or any kind of cultural beliefs that leads him to really pushing the guilty vote. It's personal. And you find out as time goes on that this is really sort of him projecting his life onto this defendant. And but he right out of the gate, he comes off as this sort of ferocious beast. And really, I think every single juror at some point feels his wrath at some point. But he's the perfect juxtaposition to Fonda, who is this, calm, cool, and collected sort of, white knight. And it's just amazing, because he'll go from 0 to 100 in a few seconds. He'll be talking in a very cool and calm voice, and then all of a sudden he just explodes, and he'll get so excited that he can't even get his point across sometimes. But to me, he's of course the other essential one next to juror number 8.
Yeah, and he is the quintessential bully, and there are types of leaders, and I go back to this whole like idea of leadership in this show. You have one who's the guy who's just kind of appointed, and he can be knocked down very easily. You have 8 who makes himself into the kind leader who's going to ultimately win the day. But 3 is the leader that you run into way too much, and we've all had people in our lives who've been like this, either an overbearing coach or a jerk of a manager at work or what have you, where the only way he knows how to get his point across is through fear and
Yeah.
through violence. And I don't mean that as taking a swing, although he potentially tries to stab juror number 8, but mental violence and just beating people down to a point where sooner or later they're just going to break in front of you. And we saw that with juror number 1. But there's so much going on with juror number 3 that I'm really impressed by, both the character but also Cobb as an actor, because he goes through so much. This is really the most damaged of the members of the jury. I think maybe juror number 10 is damaged for other reasons, but Cobb is the only one who truly has an arc in terms of coming around to the idea that what he has done is based on personal issues that he should not be bringing into this, and he should work out outside of what's going on in the courtroom. And I love the fact that at the end, when everyone else has left, even the racist number 10 has left, 3 is still sitting there looking at the torn up piece of paper of him and his son. And another thing, before I even get to that point, when he tears up the picture of him and his son, immediately he regrets doing that. And you can see that in Cobb's eyes. It's not like oh, I'm so angry. It's, oh my God, what did I just do? Why did I just do that? There's no, I've stepped over a line that I didn't even realize I was stepping over. But then at the end, he's looking down in disgust at himself and what he has done, and the fact that he has taken this so far where he almost got a man killed. And Fonda walks over to him and puts his coat on. And at that moment, you can see that Cobb has now taken a turn. Now, will that mean that his life will be better in the long run? I don't know. But he's the only one who walks out of that room a changed person. And I think that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, just his whole arc, because the way that he started, it's almost like he rises, he peaks, and then he falls again, because he starts out he has this calm, cool, demeanor sort of in the beginning, and then it reaches sort of its apex, when Fonda calls him a sadist, and he almost comes to blows with Fonda. And then as it reaches the climax, when you really find out why he has been so adamant about voting the way he's voting. But yeah, Cobb, he gets every emotion perfectly, and like I said, you get frustrated by the character, but you never dislike him, because you always know that beneath there's something going on.
Yeah.
And he gives what could be an unlikable character humanity, because if you were to read it on the page, you would say, oh, this is just a blowhard and I've got to scream the whole time and everything. But he gives him these levels and these layers that really juxtapose well with Fonda's.
And there are several points in the movie where he is shown to be a hypocrite, and it's done well.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is when he's bloviating about what every parent and adult says, no matter what generation you're in. These kids these days, they don't understand. They don't respect their elders. I used to call my dad sir. And then he turns it and basically belittles juror number 9 too. And that's when he starts losing the crowd, is when he goes after the old man. As soon as he does that, he starts losing people. And the hypocrisy there, like, I was respectful of my elders, but now I'm, I don't even realize I'm not. And the other thing too, he's always the one who will use facts as long as they're facts. And then as soon as they go away from what he needs, he'll throw them out. So for example, he'll say, you don't need to worry about anything else. Just worry about the woman seeing what happened. And then after a while, they all figure out that she probably couldn't have seen what she thought she saw. And then he says, well, what about the knife? What about the old man? Everyone points out to him, it's like, you're the one who said this is the only thing that
Uh-huh.
matters. And as soon as we threw that out, you found another reason. And it's just going to show again that he doesn't care about this kid. He's not like juror number 10 where he wants to see this kid fry. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
All he wants to do is see a father be vindicated for the wrongs that he feels his son has done, and he is projecting that onto this kid. And I think it's done so well, and I think it's one of the strongest performances in the piece.
Oh yeah. And you mentioned, I guess this is a good time to talk about it now, but we only see this kid, this defendant, once in a really quick close up as the jury is leaving. But they make him out to be sort of, any kid that you could come across. They really never give him. You really can't tell what his ethnicity is. Of course
Yeah.
they're saying, but you hear them say, how these people are, so you can put any kind of ethnic group
Exactly.
into that. They never really give it a specific thing, and of course that comes later on when we talk about another juror down the way.
Here's another thing I like about the kid. His name is John Savoca, and I don't think he was in anything else ever. He's just labeled as the accused. But I like the decision they made to, when they show him and he's kind of looking up, you don't get a read on the kid. At least I don't. Because the whole point of this is we don't know if he did it. We never get told, did he do it or did he not? As you mentioned to begin with, it's all about reasonable doubt. Do we have a reasonable doubt that this kid did it? At the end, we do. But he still may have done it. Even Fonda says, I don't know. I may be letting a guilty man go free, but I have doubt. And I liked when they showed his face. He's not crying. He's not scared. He's just kind of a blank slate that the viewer can kind of impart what they feel onto him. He's just kind of looking off in the distance. He could be looking off in the distance thinking, I've been caught. He could be looking off in the distance thinking, oh my God, what has happened to me? I didn't do this. You don't know. And I think that's a good choice. And I think if we would have saw him more, we would have got a read, and I think they would have hurt the story.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was done just right. Let's move on now, though, from juror number 3 to juror number 4, played by E.G. Marshall. And here's how he's described: a rational, unflappable, self-assured, and analytical stockbroker who's concerned only with the facts. He's the 11th to ultimately vote not guilty. He's convinced after concluding the witness eyesight was in question. So, yeah, what's your take on juror number 4?
You said, and by the way, I was wrong. Juror number 3 and juror number 4 were not in Twilight Zone. They were listed in asterisks as not in Twilight Zone on my list, and I read that wrong. But
okay.
Just so somebody doesn't yell at me in the comments. But with 4, you said that number 3 was the antithesis of number 8. I humbly disagree, sir. I think the antithesis.
In temperament, maybe.
Yeah.
In temperament.
Yeah. In temperament, you're correct. Yeah. But I think really number 4 is the exact opposite.
Oh yeah.
At the table of 8, because 8 and 4 both are coming into this without skin in the game. They have no reason to care one way or the other about how this goes. And they both want to just drive towards the end, where the end is the correct situation, the correct conclusion to this. And so throughout this, 4 is somebody who is just methodical. He's just going through point by point. And I love the fact that he is one of the last to turn, because you have to get through every single piece of evidence that he has before you can make it to him. And he's not going to cave on you just because you want him to. You have to sell him. And that's another thing with 8 having to find a way to get through each one of these. With this one, he just has to go through point by point and sell the guy. And I love the feedback that we get off this. And yeah, with the glasses and the eyewear, I go to sleep in my glasses. Just want to throw it out there. But I love the way that this character is played out, to where you don't hate him. You're really not even rooting against him. Half the time you may be thinking, okay, this guy may have a point. And it's done very well.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the movie, the whole way that Fonda sort of breaks juror number 4 down and sways his vote, with being not able to remember the names of the movies, and the whole and the whole thing with the eyeglasses, which maybe in the 50s wearing glasses was a little bit a different experience, but
Or maybe I'm just
but
dumb. One of the two.
but yeah, like you said, I never hate him, and there's times when you actually think, oh, this guy thinks about it in a decent way. Maybe I need to start thinking his way because everything he's saying kind of makes sense. And yeah, he's never in it. He's never in it personally. He's never in it with any kind of vendetta. He's all about the facts. He's all it's kind of this sort of analytical, almost not game, analytical sort of sport for him. And it's fun. E.G. Marshall's an interesting actor to watch think.
I love it when I think it's Klugman turns and goes, "Do you ever sweat?" And he just goes, "No." He just looks straight ahead. No,
Yeah,
I don't. I don't let this stuff stress me. I'm good.
yeah, he's so great. And well, segue. We move on to juror number 5, played by Jack Klugman, who we recently talked about in Twilight Zone.
He's definitely been in Twilight Zone.
And he's one of the standouts in this movie to me. And he's the one that really sort of projects his own life onto the defendant at times. Well, where do you think juror number 5 sort of stands in the mix?
Juror number 5 to me is the closest one to the accused, and they point that out a couple times. Even just ancillary, we have the Yankees fan, and he says he's a Baltimore fan, and everyone looks at him like, "I'm sorry, you're a Baltimore fan. That's terrible." And when people start pointing out that these guys, these guys who live in the rough parts of town and how they act, and he says, "I've lived in a rough part of town. I've always lived in a rough part of town. This is who I am." So it does two things. It dulls that argument that number 10 is going to use a lot. That all of these people who are impoverished and like this, whatever, are always trouble. And he's like, "Look, I'm sitting here. I look as well dressed as you all do. I'm speaking to you as anyone else would, and stop assuming things about people like me." And along with that, it also helps us to understand what may have come about in terms of the accused having to deal with the life situations he's in, because we have somebody in the room who can somewhat talk to that too. And I love Klugman as an actor. I mean, he wins the times on Twilight Zone. He's in 1, 2, 3, 4. He's in 4 episodes. We've only seen one of him so far. He'll be in quite a few more. But I always love him as an actor. He's got an odd face and an odd voice that just goes so well together.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And of course, his big claim to fame was his Oscar on The Odd Couple, which he's brilliant in too. But yeah, I love that. There are times that I feel like his character. Now with juror number 10, I would definitely take things personally, but there's times when other people make arguments where sometimes he might take things too personally. But sometimes emotions play into that, and we can't help it. But yeah, he's the one that brings, as you mentioned before, the point of view of the defendant into the jury room, and he's the only one that we really get that point of view from.
Agreed.
So let's move on now to the one that's kind of juror number 6. I think he's the one that gets the least to do. I feel
you mean
like
juror Blake Slate?
Edward Benz, who we've seen on Twilight Zone, also.
Yeah, he's the dick in I shot an arrow.
Yeah, and he gets the shortest description of any other. He says he's a house painter, tough but principled and respectful. The 6th juror to vote not guilty.
We will see him again in the Twilight Zone far from now. But
yeah. But he's the one who I feel like really his job is to stick up for the ones that are getting bullied by juror number 3. Basically, that's what he does.
Well, he's the one who calls him out about disrespecting your elders when 3 goes after 9. He's the one that says, "What the hell is wrong with you?" He doesn't say hell. He's 7. He's like, "Well, what's wrong with you?" And I think that the one thing he's there to do is to show us when the initial turn happens, because we'll get to the first turn, and that's 9. But the second group of folks who turn, he's one of them. And again, I think he turns because he starts realizing, much like 1 does later on, that if I have to make a choice between the people in the room, I'm going to choose the people who I think are good people and want to do the right thing, and so I'm going to switch over.
Yeah.
And I think we see that when he confronts 3.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's kind of the truth teller in the room. He's the one that's really good at reading the room and sort of forecasting where things are going and how they're doing. But again, he's, like I said, he's the one that gets the least to do. But he's kind of the bridge from where the turn goes, though, like as you mentioned before. So he's essential in that way. But let's move on, though, to one that does play a much bigger role, and that's juror number 7, played by Jack Warden, another Twilight Zone alum that we've talked about.
The last
And
three,
here's
by
how
the way,
he's.
no one on the other side of the table were in Twilight Zone. It's like that side of the table was
Oh,
not
wow.
good enough for him.
I'm sure if they paid Henry Fonda enough money, he might have. But
Well, and unfortunately, Joseph Sweeney, juror number 9, passed away before the show had finished its run. So he didn't have much of a shot, unfortunately.
Yeah. So here's how number 7, played by Jack Warden, another one of my favorite actors. As a salesman and New York Yankees fan who's so eager to leave in order to attend a baseball game that he becomes impatient with the deliberations, despite the fact that the defendant's life is at stake. He's the 7th to ultimately vote not guilty. And he's really the only one who votes not guilty in a passive way, just so he can get out of there.
Yeah.
Which, is one of the big dramatic points of the movie.
And we never get a culmination of that. It's not like they call him on it, and when number 9 calls him on it, and it's very much like a disappointed father and his son looking at him going, you don't get to just decide where you stand. If you stand for not guilty, you give us a reason why. He never does. He never turns. It's just a matter of he wants to get the hell out of the room. And he's probably, aside from number 10, the most despicable person in that room for that reason. At least 3 comes around. 7 never does.
Yeah. Well, and even 3 has that moment where he shows his disappointment in number 7, because that's one thing he agrees with everybody else on. He's like, at least be passionate on one end or the other and present a passionate argument, fight for something. And he's not fighting for anything.
And I love Jack Warden as an actor too. I think he's probably the one I recognize the most, aside from Klugman and just things in general. I think he's the weakest point of this movie because, and it really comes down to he's a one-note character. And I know all of them are stereotypes and iconic ideas of what characters should be, but all he does is he makes baseball references over and over again. Even the marketing guy has something to add to the mix every now and then, not too often. I think he's the second weakest guy in there, juror number 12. But I get tired of the baseball references. I mean, there's one where he actually catches himself. I think it's when he's talking about the old man being able to shuffle himself to the stairs in 15 seconds, and he says, did he get on, as in get on base? And then he stopped himself and he said, did he get through or whatever? I don't. But it gets old. I get you're a baseball fan and a sports fan. Great. Your one saving grace is you're the one who figured out how to plug the fan in. Congratulations.
Yeah. But then he ends up hitting the old man in the head with the paper toss.
which is one of the number 9. I will get to him in a minute, but I love that the way they play him up. There's a couple just awkward scenes in there, and that is one of them where he says that's a damn stupid thing to do or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, there's not really much else, as you mentioned before, to add to Warden's character. I mean, I think it would have been a lot more one-noted. You had another actor who couldn't bring out the layers that Warden would.
I'll completely agree with you on that. I'm not knocking Warden at all. I think he just wasn't given much to play with.
Yeah, but he's there to be and it's interesting that he's the passive one and he's sitting smack dab in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not taking a side anywhere. So it's that's the way that's juxtaposed. But we'll, as you mentioned, we'll skip number 8. We'll come to him at the last one. So let's go to juror number 9, Joseph Sweeney, a wise and observant retiree. He's the second to vote not guilty. At the end, he reveals to juror number 8 his real name. Only one of 2 jurors to reveal his name. But his character is always interesting to me because at one point he comes across as this sweet, kindly old man, and then he'll be a curmudgeon. Next minute, I always on the side of the good, but he has these mood swings.
Is he not every grandfather and great grandfather you've ever seen in your life? They can turn on a dime.
Yeah, and he's a great actor. I love and I think his character is really, E.G. Marshall's character is the most analytical, number 4, but number 9 is the most observant.
Yes.
And of course we come to that, when he's the only one to figure out that the woman on the stand wears glasses, that her hair was dyed, and that she was probably older than she was letting on. And he lets on all those different aspects, and of course he's sort of the sort of sidekick for Fonda for the whole movie, but he's sort of the moral compass that sort of everyone revolves around.
Well, and there are 3 real reasons why I love juror number 9. First off, we already mentioned it's just the awkwardness of some of the situations that he's in. The other one is when him and 8 are walking out of the courthouse, and he introduces himself, gets number 8's name. Then they stare at each other for a minute, and they both realize, I have nothing to say to you. And he's like, okay, bye. And he kind of wanders off. And it's an amazing scene where you realize these two. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because you feel like that they would, of all the jurors, they would be the ones to have a relationship when it's all over.
But I think it says something about what makes, and juror number 10 will hit on this, or 11. Juror number 11 will hit on this, not 10, 11. 11 hits on this too, is what makes America an amazing experiment, that these 12 people, and at this point men, but if it was done today, people, can come into a room, decide a person's fate, and leave and never speak to each other again. And it's just the way the system works. And when the system works well, it works. It's the best system we've got. It's still flawed because it's made by humans, but it's the best system we got. Another reason why I like 9 is you learn a lot about his character. Yes, he is the old wise man. He is the observant one, as you mentioned. He also saw that the old man had a cut sleeve under his coat, so he didn't. Why would you wear that to a courtroom, he says. But you also learn about him, too, because he is that old man. He points out that the old man has lived the old man being the witness at this point. The witness has lived his entire life. No one has listened to him. No one has understood that he has so much experience that he can impart on the world. If people would just give him a minute to explain what he has seen in his 75 whatever years. And no one ever does that. And it's never really actually said, but you can see it in his face, and one of the other jurors kind of offhandedly mentioned it, that 9 feels the exact same way. Which goes to the last piece, and that is, this is 9's chance to change the world. He's had 70 some odd years where he hasn't had that chance. And he sees it here. Mm-hmm. And that is why I believe he, more than Fonda, saves this guy's life. Because up until juror number 9, Fonda was not going to win this. At the best, he was going to get a hung jury, and the kid was going to get, executed by the next jury who won't have one Fonda in it. But with 9 just says, I want to give you a shot. I still think he's guilty, but I want to give you a shot. And you took this risk, saying if I can get one more of you to back me, we'll talk about it, and if not, I'll switch my vote. And he said, I'll run with it. I'll let you take your risk. And it takes a lot of courage to do that, and it takes an old, wise person to understand that that's what was needed right there. So he is one of my favorites.
Yeah. And he's someone, I feel like, of all them, he's the one that kind of defies the odds. This is a man who's lived 70 somewhat years and doesn't have to prove anything anymore, but he wants to prove something. And he wants to give back. And so he's putting in more effort than anyone would feel like he would even have the, obligation to give.
And I would go one step farther and say he doesn't want to do something. He needs to do something. This is his last chance, and he's going to take
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. And he, I think next to Fonda, he's the most essential jury member of the 12 almost. He really is the one that makes things move, and when it's time for things to start to make a shift, he makes these observations that no one else does, and really begins to turn the tide. Um, so let's move on from one type of juror to a completely different type of juror. Juror number 10, played by Ed Begley, who garage owner, pushy, loudmouth bigot, and the 10th to ultimately vote not guilty. And when I talked about the most despicable juror, this is the most despicable juror. But played so well by Ed Begley, who, because this is a guy on first glance might not seem like the kind of person that we learn he is, but just things come out of his mouth that just to me, my favorite moment in the movie centers on his character, and I think you alluded to it earlier, when he just goes on his big bigoted rampage, trying to grasp at straws at the end, and even the jurors that vehemently disagree with each other, like Fonda and Cobb, they all turn their backs to him, and thinking, we think he's not guilty, but we're not stooping to the depths that he does. And I think that's probably the most powerful image in the movie. People love that freeze frame with all their back, well, except E.G. Marshall, but all their backs. But E.G. Marshall gets that great line to him, yeah, we heard you. Now sit down and don't open your mouth again. Uh, and he's really, he's the one that really causes most of the firework. I think if it were just Cobb and not him, it would have been a different story. But he really is the one that really gets most of the fiery moments of the piece going.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think this says a lot about our system as much as 9 and 11 say a lot about our system. Is that people like this in a system that allows and I'm not saying I don't want this system, by the way. Comment section, calm down. But in the system that allows a minority thought the ability to be heard like this, you get these minority opinions. And unfortunately, if you don't shut them down, they can control what goes on. And that's why my favorite, and you're right, it's all one scene, so it's hard to call it a scene, but my favorite point in this entire movie is when he is going on his final, like, crazy tirade. It's built up. At first, he's like, well, I don't really care about this kid. I just think he's guilty. And then, well, kids like this, they don't respect their parents and blah, 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 blah. And by the end, he says they at least 20 or 30 times and uses of the word theys. They do this, they do that, they do this, those do that, they do, they do, they. And he tries to sell it by continuing to say, I'm right. You think the same way. I'm right. And that's how this works. That's how prejudice spreads. Is they try to make everyone find that stereotype and latch onto it. All brown people are lazy, right? You know that. Everyone knows that. You know that kids are, going to hate their parents. You know that. It just keeps on going and going and going. And my favorite piece about that is when they all start gradually either turning their heads or walking away from the table. As you already said, that's how you shut this down. That's how you stop this. You give them, you take away their ability to use the bully pulpit. As soon as you let them know no one is listening and no one is going to take your opinion seriously, it will shut them down. And if it doesn't shut them down, it doesn't matter because you're not listening to them anymore. And all too often, we try to shut down with violence over violence, which is what 3 does. He says, "Sit down and shut up." Everyone else does the correct approach, at least in my opinion, and that is walk away. Let this idiot be an idiot. You're not going to change him. And Fonda says the same thing. you're not going to change him. Don't
Yeah.
try to change him. Just let him go. He will isolate himself. And
Yeah.
I think it's done really well, and unfortunate that it has to be done, but it is.
And he never, after that moment, he never says a word for the rest of the movie.
And I don't think he changes his mind. I think his prejudice remains. He is just so embarrassed that what he thought was a group of people who were his peers and who understood him have now just completely shunned him.
Yeah.
He just gives up. That's why I don't think he changes, but I think 3 does, because 3 actually has an epiphany, whereas in 10's just he's just put in his place.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a powerful moment. Let's move on now, though, to juror number 11, George Vosovic, a European watchmaker and naturalized American citizen, and ultimately the fourth to vote not guilty. What do you think of juror number 11?
I love juror number 11. Juror number 11 is ideology, apple pie, everything all wrapped into one. He's draped in the American flag and it's got the Declaration of Independence in his back pocket. I love him. He is perfect for what we need in that, and we need more of him. And the fact that he's an immigrant makes it even better. He doesn't have to be an immigrant. They kind of tie it to, and I think one of them, I don't even know if it was 10, but one of them says, they come over here and immediately they think they can tell us how to run things. But they can, because they actually have bought into it. You've been born into it. They had to buy into it. So they're going to drink the Kool-Aid more. And I love it. And I love the fact that he is the voice in the room saying, this is how it's supposed to work. This is why the American system is the best system in the world and the best system in history, which I honestly believe. And that is because it allows us to come together, as we saw with 8 and 9 at the end, and make decisions that are going to be the right decisions. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen all the time. It's a flawed system. But again, it's the best system we have. And I love that 11 voices that over and over again.
Well, and that's why the moment with him and 7, I think that's the most powerful moment involving 7, when he just decides to change his vote on that whim because he wants to get out of there. Because this is a guy who fought tooth and nail to get over to this country for the right to sit on a jury, and this guy is totally disrespecting the whole process. So I think that's why he was the perfect one to call him out. And he doesn't get very many of those moments, but he gets a few of those moments, and when he does, it's very, very powerful.
And the actor does a wonderful job in doing it. He doesn't. It could very well be a cheesy, almost too Frank Capra-esque, and he doesn't go down that road. And I appreciate that. And as somebody who's never been selected for jury duty, I'm very disappointed that I have not been. And I'm serious. I want to be on jury duty. So bad. I never get picked.
I know. I'm always afraid that I'll get just like a simple traffic case or something like that.
You could be like President Obama and get shown the door at noon because they don't want you. We'd rather you not taint the jury pool. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So he's to me he's one of the best of the jurors. But let's move on now. Well, not the second to last one, to Robert Weber, who's a wisecracking, indecisive advertising executive. The only juror not sure what to vote, changing his vote more than once during deliberations, initially voting guilty, changing 3 times until he's the 8th to ultimately vote not guilty. He is the flip-flopper. He gets he's okay in that moment where he's like, oh, this is that point where we come to a meeting, and he does all those little wisecracks about the advertising world. I think he's kind of the precursor to Mad Men.
A man whose job it is to tell you what to think, and he doesn't know what to think for himself.
Yeah.
The irony in there is thick, and it is almost too thick.
Yeah. Because he gets to that point where, the whole stabbing thing with Fonda, and he's seen the whole thing with Klugman about how you hold a knife and everything, and he's even tried it himself, and Fonda's like, thinking he's got it, what do you think? And then he's like, I don't know. And then sits down.
And his nervous tick, where every time he has to make a decision, he puts his glasses on and starts giving this hem and haw about, well, it could go either way, blah, 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 blah. Then he takes his glasses off and makes no decision. Ever. And I'm pretty sure if he would have waited another 5 minutes, he would have voted a different way, which is, and we'll get to 8 here very quickly, but that's one of the smartest things 8 does. And I learned this in my time in elected office. Yes, I was a politician, sorry. But when you have the votes, you call a vote immediately. Do not wait for people to change their minds again. So as soon as he gets number 3, I call for a vote immediately.
Yeah.
Because 12 is going to change his mind every 5 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, and then like he doesn't even have that great of an attention span. There's that one where juror number 1's calling the vote, and he gets to number 12, and 12's just staring off into space, and then all of a sudden he just looks at him and does that really sort of indignant, guilty. I forget how he does it, but it's almost like he's not there some of the time.
Guilty. If Warden is the weakest character in this film, 12 is the second weakest character in this film.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they ran out of archetypes though, so they had to get another one in there. But let's talk about though to the the whole reason for the change happening, and that's juror number 8, played by Henry Fonda, who Fonda is one of my favorite. Jimmy Stewart, I said, is my. Henry Fonda though is right up there, and interesting because they were best friends in real life. But Fonda, just like Jimmy Stewart, played these very archetypal American heroes: Tom Joad in The Grapes of Wrath, Abraham Lincoln in Young Mr. Lincoln. And all these, stuff like he played Doc Holliday in My Darling Clementine, and all these great movies, and he always typified the sort of all-American hero, and this is one of his best heroic roles, and he fits it perfectly, and he has this amazing calm demeanor. He never, even when he's calling out juror number 3 on things, he never raises his voice. He always has that sort of saying. He'll get stern, but he won't get violent. He won't get mad. He has that great sort of calming presence that just sort of makes you want to follow him.
Yeah, and I think that is the reason why he's able to turn the tide. Is he is somebody that is not confrontational. He decides what every person in the room needs, and he works towards giving them what they need.
Yeah.
4 needs to be told exactly why every point he's making is incorrect. So I will do that. I will not do it confrontationally. I will not question his intelligence. I am just going to go point by point and tell him why he's wrong. Number 12 needs to be talked to the last in the room, so we'll just talk to him last and make sure he changes his vote. He goes through each one of these, and he does it so well. And along with that, he imparts on these guys doubt. Again, he never tells them this kid didn't kill his dad. Not once does he say he didn't do it. It's, are you sure? Can you tell me you're positive? And most of the time the guys are like, yeah, I can. But he's like, are you really sure? Can you keep doing this? And he's so smart in several different times. I mean, in the bathroom, he doesn't really talk. He listens. And the same when he's at the window with number 1. Doesn't say a word. He just kind of smiles and nods and listens. He's learning about these guys. He's endearing himself to them. And it is done so well. And I just mentioned already, when he knows he's won, he doesn't spike the football. He immediately goes into a vote and calls it. And he knows how to use the procedure too. There's another time where I think he has 4 or 5 votes in his favor. So he's still down below, and he still may not win this thing. And I think it's 4, maybe it's 3, he starts making a point that you can see is starting to turn the room against him. Immediately he says, I want another vote. And what that does is, he may not get more votes, but he's shutting down the argument. He's stopping that guy from saying something that could damage his argument down the road. So he says, I want another vote. And it stops it. And it is not exactly the most ethical thing to do, but at that moment, that's what you have to do. And he did it.
Yeah, I the way that he and you've mentioned this before because we've kind of talked about him throughout, but I love that he never I love that he's never sure about the innocence of the defendant, you know, but like we said, the movie is all about reasonable doubt. And you know, he never, like you said, he never questions the intelligence of certain ones, and he's able to read the room. He's able to read each guy, and he's able to observe each guy and know what each one of them needs. And you know, and he's someone who sees each of them as human beings. Like the very last, you know, scene when he's, you know, giving Cobb his coat, and he doesn't really, uh, you know, the parts of it he'll take personally, like when he's letting juror number three have it during that middle part of the movie. But uh, he's this very sort of heroic figure that doesn't come across as heroic. He's very unassuming. He's just doing it because he feels like what it is right. And it's those little character moments, like when we talked about him and juror number one. You know, the way that he relates to each of them on a human level, and it's played perfectly because it's a character that could come across very almost, you know, and he's a character that could be almost underwritten at times, but the way that Fonda plays him, you know, he doesn't play him at one note. He doesn't play him as always heroic. He gives him these shades like Cobb does, and it's really amazing to watch, to see how he slowly makes the room move and how he never loses his cool. And it's interesting because you're in a room full of volatile personalities, and he's sort of that calm in the storm, and he always remains the constant. And you know, it's just perfect. It's perfect the way that his character sort of moves things along. But yeah, one of Fonda's best performances.
And you just hope that if you are ever somebody who is accused of something you didn't do, that there
Yeah,
is a juror number 8 in that room. You just pray to
yeah,
God there's a juror number 8 in the room. Please, please, please,
yeah,
please.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, we've gotten to the end of all the jurors. Any other moments though that we didn't talk about? I think we covered most of the major ones.
You know, I may be going ahead of where you want to go, so tell me and I'll shut up. But I do want to talk about just the way the director is able to make this movie an amazing movie when it could be very much almost like
Yeah,
it was made for TV because it was.
yeah, that's the next place I was. That's the next place I was going.
Then I
So
will shut
yeah.
up. Go ahead, Brandon.
Oh no! Go ahead because you segued into it. So let's.
Well, first off, we are in this claustrophobic room for the whole movie, but before we do that, there are some sweeping shots of the courthouse. You know,
Yeah.
outside looking up at the pillars and looking up at the architecture.
Mhm.
When you go into the chambers, it's kind of sweeping around and moving, and it's
Mhm.
giving us a feel of the openness of the court system and the openness of the world in general, which makes it even more stark when they walk in the room and the key is the lock is God locked. I'm losing my mind. The door is locked. There we go, and they're in that room for the rest of the time, and
Yeah.
you get that sweeping idea that kind of locks you in as you go in too. So I think it's very smart how they do that. And at the end too, when we're let out of the room, much like the jurors, we get a nice arching shot of the steps as Fonda just leaves to his life, whatever that life may be, as an architect. And we'll never see this guy again. He's made his addition to the system, and now it's time for him to go.
Yeah. You know, the way that Lumet sets the cameras at the beginning, because everything's done in wide shots in the beginning, and you see like all of the 12 together. You see most people, and then as you get toward the end of the movie, it's close-ups mainly. It's much more claustrophobic. And I think it's because as each character reveals himself, you know, we begin to see them at a much closer level. And so, you know, you really it's almost like the room's closing in on you as the movie continues. And then once the verdict is read, it opens up again and everything is sort of out in the open. So he makes it cinematic when it could have been very static. and I think that's something very impressive, especially for a young director to have done.
Well, and you started out by saying this. He didn't know how to do it right, so he just did it his way and
Yeah.
it worked. But so many directors, especially nowadays, would do all these cuts. You know, every time somebody starts talking, we have a zoom in on their face. But with this, he lets the room kind of breathe. There's a couple scenes where people are talking, and actually in the center of the frame is Jack Warden spinning his, his towel around and just goofing off in the background.
Yeah.
And he allows it to happen. He allows the interaction to happen. He allows scenes to go on for several minutes at a time and kind of free flow. And they walk around the room with the camera, and it feels like a live shot, and it's done well. And in the era of choppy editing, it's just a breath of fresh air.
Yeah. People let the story speak for itself a lot of times, and actually, I'm looking at the budget of the movie. The movie was made for $340,000. So,
It's Fonda didn't take a paycheck.
yeah. Well, like I said, he put most of his money into the movie, and they said that would be the equivalent. Well, this is 2016 dollars, but 2,899,000 in today's dollars. But I guess we can kind of get toward the wrapping up here. But when the movie was released, it was not a box office success. In fact, as a matter of fact, it didn't make much money at all. But that was because this is 1957. This is the advent of widescreen and color and big spectacles. So 12 Angry Men would not have been very appealing to people wanting to go to see Ben-Hur or something like that was coming out around the same time. But it's really like we talked about last year with It's a Wonderful Life. It's a movie that grew in stature much more when it was shown on TV over and over. So that's when it started to find an audience. But it was nominated for a couple Oscars. It was nominated for Best Picture, it was nominated for Best Director and Adapted Screenplay, but that was the year of Bridge on the River Kwai, so that took a lot of the major awards. Which a huge sprawling movie like Bridge on the River Kwai and a very simple done movie like 12 Angry Men. So you can see where the Academy voters kind of went. But let's see, on the AFI Top 100 movies of all time, it's number 87. And juror number 8 is the 28th greatest hero in movie history. So, and it was, let's see, the number 2 greatest courtroom drama. So it's grown in stature over the years. And I think it's IMDb top 250 in a while, but I think it's like the oldest movie in the top 10. I think it's or close to that. I remember it was pretty high on the list, but it's amazing to me. I saw it for the first time, I think, in junior high in school, and I think they still show it in schools sometimes, especially when you're taking like business law in high school or something like that. But yeah, it's a movie that really I think will be evergreen because, as you said, it's a period piece, but it's also timeless, and it's in the way that it just sort of breaks down our justice system for people. It's done in a very clever and clear way.
The only thing that makes it not timeless is the fact that it's 12 white guys in a room. That's it.
Yes.
But aside from that, everything that they say, everything they do, could be the exact same thing that's done in the courtroom today. Every last piece of it.
Well, and they remade it actually in 1997 for HBO with a ethnic with a more racially diverse cast. It was all men, but Jack Lemmon played juror number 8. George C. Scott played juror number 3. But then you had like Courtney B. Vance playing juror number 1, Ozzie Davis playing juror number 2, James Gandolfini was juror number 6, Tony Danza was juror number 7. Edward James Olmos was juror number 11. So you had a mix of ages, a mix of ethnicities, but I've watched it, and it does not have the power of this original one.
Well, and I'll say I've seen it too, and one of the things I think stands out the most, and I love Jack Lemmon.
Yeah.
My Fellow
Oh, yeah.
Americans is one of we're going to have to talk My Fellow Americans sooner or later because I love that movie.
It's been years since I've seen that.
Oh, it's so good, but he doesn't play it like Fonda played it. He
Yeah.
gets more argumentative. He raises his voice. He shouts.
Yeah.
And at that point, I get what he's going for. He's going for a different approach, but I don't think that would work. And so everything I said about Fonda and how he plays it, Lemmon does the exact opposite, and it makes it for a weaker movie. And it's just production wise, it's a weaker movie. But yeah,
yeah. So this movie, though, it's funny. You can show this to young people today. I mean, young people who would balk if you asked them to watch a black and white movie. If you make it through 10 minutes of this movie, you're locked in for the rest of the time because it won't lose your attention. And so, Scott, we'll talk about we'll close out here. What are your final thoughts on 12 Angry Men?
It's one of my favorite films of all time. I watched it again last night, and I smiled the whole way through. I've kind of talked about the two weaker characters, but there is nothing really weak about this movie. It is one of the best films of all time. And if you haven't seen it, you should, and you need to go check it out. And I hope that we all have something to gain from it, because not only is it just a good film to watch, it's great drama, but it has a message that I think we all need to listen to a little bit more.
Well, and I feel like our justice system has sort of become a bit of a circus within the last couple decades, starting with the OJ trial and sort of going on for the last 2 decades. And we've seen, jury tampering, jury, all this drama going on. And I feel like if we got back to the basic roots of what our justice system intended juries to be, which this movie so brilliantly plays out, it would be much better for us all in the long run. But in the meantime, we can watch this movie and just be sort of awed by what it can do when it works. So, Scott, as we close out, do a little plugging for us. Where can people find us?
I am all about the plugging. Okay, you can find us at thefrontrowmoviereviews.com. You can email us at thefrontrowmoviereviews@gmail.com. You can find us on all your social media haunts by searching for the Front Row Movie Reviews. And at our website, you can find all of Brandon's classics. You can find our Zonasodes that we shamelessly plug several times here. And there are a whole bunch of other shows, including look at movies from the 80s and 90s, look at Disney movies, look at movies that are guilty pleasures of some, and for other of us, we think it's probably stuff that should not be spoke of again. But please make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube, and also subscribe and give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, whatever you're listening to us on. We'd love to hear from more people, so your reviews and your likes and subscriptions get us out to more people, and we want to talk about this stuff. So do it now.
Absolutely. And once again, I love doing classics, and I hope one day you'll get to hear Young Frankenstein.
Hey, we got Searchers out, man.
Yeah. It might be stuck in the vaults forever, but we'll see.
But I'm telling you, Brandon, I told you Searchers was not one of my favorite Westerns. I have The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance on my DVR. It is sitting there. I'm not going to watch it
until you tell
me to. But we need to watch it sometime.
Yeah, I know that, and the original Magnificent Seven, and there's a couple more on my list of Westerns. So
yeah, when you start talking Westerns, I can get behind it.
2018 is being planned, so we shall see. And I know that Lou and I have talked about, since he and I have never actually done a podcast together, but I think it's about time we tackle Citizen Kane, and he just taught it in his class, so we'll see if we can tackle that here in 2018 too. So we've got some stuff coming up. But
Whenever I hear Orson Welles, I think Unicron. I already did that podcast.
oh gosh. Or the Muppet movie, which we need to talk about
Dude,
too.
we need to do the Muppet movie. I was driving to Chicago a few weeks ago, and I just listened to the Muppet movie soundtrack, and it was amazing. Moving right along.
Yeah. Oh,
Loose and fancy
it's so
free.
good. Yeah. So we will get to it. But anyway.
Much like we will get to the Zona Zone episode we have to record tonight. Come on.
Yes. So anyway, as we close out this episode, I am Brandon Davis.
I am Scott McFarland.
And we will see you in the front row.
Front row. My row.
Not on the